for the attention. My name is Teresa Borisova. Once again, it's my pleasure to be here with you. And we are about to start the last panel at today's event, which is dedicated to a dimension which I believe is very dear to all of us as humans, as individuals, and that's the human rights and ethical dimensions or ethics in artificial intelligence. We will also try to take into account some of the emerging or already existing international initiatives that tackle these aspects, and kind of try to, in general, zoom out on the questions like how do the principles of ethics, of non-discrimination, of privacy project them into the artificial intelligence discourse. We will try to tackle questions such as how can international cooperation, that we discussed quite extensively in the previous panels, ameliorate the ethical and societal impacts of artificial intelligence. For this discussion, I have four gentlemen with me whom I would like to introduce to you briefly. Starting on my left, we have Ricardo Castañeira, who works on the public policy, government and European affairs at the permanent representation of Portugal to the European Union. After him, I would like to also present another speaker, which is Mr. Brian Paré from Global Affairs Canada and the Results and Delivery Unit. So we will have two speakers kind of coming from the government perspective. We will continue with Nicolas Hodac, who is the government and regulatory affairs executives at IBM. And finally, it is also a pleasure for me to have Nicolas Moes with us. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, who is a researcher in AI policy at the Future Society and its Artificial Intelligence Society. We will also try to see how this panel flows, because this might be the last opportunity for you to kind of bring in the concerns that you have. So if you allow me, I would just like to kick off with a little teasers that each of our speakers will give us in just 2-3 minutes on their perspectives on some of the questions I've noted and where they are coming from. I would like to start with you, Ricardo.
Well, thank you very much, Teresa. It's a pleasure to attend this, I would say, the most philosophical panel of this morning. I think that what we're going to say is quite linked with the chapter 4 of the report that has also been presented this morning, which is quite interesting to see. Last week, I've attended a conference on AI, one of the thousands of conferences that we do have on this issue here in Brussels. And I've heard from a very important chief legal officer from a well-known tech company the following, and I will quote: "We should not ask what computers can do, but what computers should do." I think this is a very, I would say, quite interesting starting point to discuss ethics on AI, or ethics on technology, I would say. And it would bring me to, as you know, European Union has just set out ethical guidelines on AI. By the way, the limit of this public consultation process is February 1st. It means that all of you can, for sure, participate actively on this discussion. And I would like to just, as a first intervention, raise the most important principles that are part of this document. First of all, fairness, which is, I might say, something that is quite obvious for all of us. It means that all systems should treat all people fairly. Second one, inclusiveness, non-discriminatory solutions and inclusion of stakeholders in the design and development of AI systems. Third, transparency and predictability. It means that all people should understand what AI means. It should be as much as possible predictable. It means that developers should share as much as possible information. This is a big challenge because normally machine learning, as we know nowadays, does not rely on the same rules established in advance as we already knew for other kind of technological solutions. It means that this is the so-called black box on AI, and this is really a huge challenge. Another principle is security and privacy. It means that all AI solutions must be secure, and of course the privacy by design, which is nothing that is very new to us. Just to remind you that we are still discussing e-privacy right now, and I think that there is a strong link between those two matters specific on this e-privacy item. Another one is accountability. It means that it must be possible to assess, to audit the algorithms and understand, I would say, the main parameters. And the way that people understand, it's I would say the most important reason to be social acceptable. And if it is not social acceptable, and now we are living a tech clash nowadays, which is a very important context to discuss all these issues. People are now starting to fall out of love with some companies, with some technology, and this is, of course, a very important factor to understand the way that we are now getting the solutions on AI. And the last but not the least, really reliability and safety. It means that systems should perform safely, reliably, and of course legislation and ethics should control the performance of AI systems. This is, I would say, in a nutshell, the most important principles that are part of the guidelines that have been issued by the European Commission.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for your intro remarks. Going to Brian, Canada has been one of the first countries that released its AI national strategy. Where are you coming from, taking into account these aspects we are discussing at this panel?
I guess
and please speak closely.
A couple of things that we're doing in addition to that strategy, which was announced in December. Very important to have that as something to guide us as a country, and it's a pan-Canadian strategy, which means that it involves civil society, it involves business, government is there for sure, and it's something that we've worked together on and will continue to engage in internationally as well. I mentioned earlier the International Panel on Artificial Intelligence. That, I will just give you something out of the mandate to that. The mission for that panel, because it has a human rights component to it, is to support and guide the responsible adoption of AI that is human-centric and grounded in human rights, inclusion, diversity, as well as innovation and economic growth. So it's bringing together the different elements of this debate issue, which has many ethical elements. I will talk to you as well about some of the priorities, just quickly, that Canada has, Global Affairs Canada has on these topics, and then some of the structural work that we're doing to advance them. So in terms of kind of positions that we're taking, we recognize, of course, that AI technologies can support the advancement of human rights as well as hinder them, and that much work is required, and we're pushing a lot for human rights, the human rights framework to accommodate AI issues. We're noting that in dialogue that we've seen in different international, bilateral, or multilateral fora, discussions on ethics or a human-centric approach or other issues are not as concrete because there's no concrete way for evaluating them. So it's the human rights language that is actually defined and agreed, and we can hold each other as countries accountable for behaviors in a human rights context. So that's a key way of how we're framing this issue. It's tangible, and we can make progress in those specific things. Just a structural thing that we have, the report, the recommendations of this report, one of the items is to set up units that bring together different players. There's a couple things we've done at Global Affairs Canada that are semi-connected, but listening to the conversation today, I'm like, oh, there's ways that we could connect multiple things in a better way. And maybe data and AI will help us to do that internally, but at least what we have right now is we have a digital inclusion lab that is leading on work in human rights and AI. They spent most of last year focusing on this topic, and they've identified a handful of the key themes that are identified in the report are part of their work. Privacy, freedom of expression, equality, and bias. They've also found in their work in the last year, they found things like online hate as being a big issue, noting that it can narrow civic space, political and economic participation, and curb human rights, including freedom of assembly and freedom of speech. This challenge also extends into the challenge of sexual and gender-based violence, systemic racial prejudice and marginalization, as well as online violence against other vulnerable or marginalized populations, including LGBTQI, ethnic and religious communities. So there's a whole bunch of work that we've been doing to kind of advance these things and moving that out into discussions with other countries, other actors internationally, to try to build that framework that would say, okay, we know these issues are out there and we need to be doing something about it. That's part of the mandate for the International Panel on AI. I guess just a final thing, part of the other piece that we're doing, my unit, which actually isn't the AI and human rights unit, we at Global Affairs Canada are developing, or have developed, a data strategy. So we're kind of building the way that we can actually make better use, do better analytics of data. At the top level, Government of Canada has created a data strategy for the Canadian Public Service, and all departments in the federal ministries have been asked to, mandated to develop data strategies by September of 2019. So we luckily, or I guess we got out ahead of the game, and we've now finished at Global Affairs our strategy, and we're moving into implementation. And the main things that we're doing in that regard are to build up awareness of the use, the potential benefits of data, making sure that we're taking advantage of it in our work. A big challenge there is the policy community is not necessarily used to using data, so we're trying to explain how you can do it, show best practices from within and external partners, and that includes things like our consular services, our trade, our development and international assistance, our entire mission support network and missions, as well as the foreign affairs team, who are probably the weakest in using data, so we're doing a lot of work to try to build up their kind of evidence-based decision-making capacity. And AI, looking at the work that the Diplo Foundation did last year on data and diplomacy and moving into AI and diplomacy, will be kind of a next thing to try and bring a number of these initiatives together.
Thank you very much, Brian. Nicholas, certainly the private sector has such a crucial role to play. You're at the center of the innovation where all of these artificial intelligence developments are coming to us. At the same time, there is a great deal of responsibility. So very unique position for you. What can you tell us about IBM and private sector in general, taking into account the ethical and human rights considerations? Thanks.
Thank you very much, Teresa. And I'm very happy that Ricardo started with mentioning Techlash, because I think that it's important that we realize the environment that we work in, because indeed the actions of certain companies, certain platforms have definitely created a lack of trust, have damaged the trust that exists between the private sector and its consumers, whether it be in the B2B or in the B2C. And so that's the environment we operate in. From our perspective, when we talk about AI, we embarked on this 2 years ago, on this notion that there needs to be trust and transparency in AI. It is not something we woke up to yesterday, it's something that we've been working on for several years, because we strongly believe that if you embed an ethical approach into AI, it actually helps your competitiveness. You know, and it is about going beyond compliance. And I know that there's been a lot of discussion about GDPR and privacy, etc. But there is a bigger responsibility that lays on the shoulders of companies. And that is that they have to think beyond compliance and think about what is it that I as a company want to stand for, and what are the ethical principles that I want to embed into the technologies that I develop. And so we as IBM embarked on this journey several years ago, that we made it very clear what do we stand for. And so we've developed what we call data responsibility at IBM principles. You know, what is it that we stand for on data, on ownership of data, on privacy and security, on access to data. But also, you know, what is it that we stand for on AI, you know, what is the purpose of AI? You know, well, what does it mean to be transparent? What does it mean to be ethical? What does it mean to explain AI? And so what I like a lot about where we are today is that I think 2019 is going to be a tipping point, because we are going to move from the philosophical discussion that Ricardo mentioned into an era of theory to action, as we call it. You will have seen that many companies will have published their principles. It seems to be very, popular to publish principles and booklets and whatever on, this is what we want as AI ethics. But the next step is actually implementing those, moving from theory to action. And this is something that we have started doing as IBM over the last couple of months, and I'm happy to talk about that a bit later on the panel. But I think we are now at a stage where people have understood that there is a responsibility that comes on us, and if you want AI to be successful, it will have to come with an ethical approach, and it will also have to be, as the high-level expert group on AI for the EU has outlined in its draft guidelines, it needs to be technically robust. So these two things need to go hand in hand. And doing that together actually will put yourself in a competitive advantage vis-a-vis others. So I think Europe is moving definitely in the right direction. The high-level expert group, of which we are a member, has published draft guidelines. It's a multidisciplinary approach, and that is exactly what you need when you talk about ethics. It's not something that governments can do by themselves, it's not something that companies can do by themselves, it's something that you need to do collectively. But the real question will be, how do we move from the theory into the action, and how do we make these guidelines actionable? Clearly, more work to be done. And that's why, as Ricardo said, I would also invite all of you to contribute to this debate. You can all sign up on the AI Alliance platform, and just share your views on how you see this. And it puts Europe in a very unique position, because we very often compare the US, Europe, and China. So, Europe's losing is losing, we don't have the euros that China and the Americans have, etc., and we don't have Silicon Valley. So we are developing AI ethics. And that is putting Europe in a really strong position. Because as Brian said, there are developments around the world now where governments are looking into this. They have understood that that's the way that it needs to go. And so Europe, in that niche can really develop something that is unique. Brian mentioned the discussions in Montreal in December, G7, and that was an announcement by Prime Minister Trudeau and the French minister that I would create an international panel, that you mentioned this. The G20 is working on this also under the leadership of the Japanese. The OECD is working on this also. So we see a lot of fora now developing this. We'll have to make sure that there is some coherence between all of this. But then the real question will be, how do we implement this? What we have, and now I'll end with this, is we are a B2B company, and we have done a survey of 5,000 of our C-level executives, clients with whom we work. 80% of them are ready to adopt AI, but 60% of them have concerns over liability, over skills, and they are asking themselves these questions. So people out there are ready to adopt AI, but they have very legitimate questions, and so this is the moment to answer those questions.
Thank you very much, Nicolas. Going to our next, Nicolas. You've done quite some research on AI, and I know that you have some ideas about how to make this happen, maybe building on the multidisciplinary, multi-stakeholder cooperation. Can you elaborate, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's actually quite nice that I end up at the end of this panel, because I think I can provide maybe a bit more of the big picture as well. So there are 3 points to kickstart the discussion afterwards. First of all is that I feel the multilateral approach, so purely governmental level discussion, has been failing. There is also the aspect that this situation of the multilateral approach failing makes a status quo that is unbearable. It's not sustainable over the long term. But unfortunately, the third point is that there are solutions, which I believe is the multi-stakeholder approach in order to. So what do I mean by the fact that the multilateral approach is failing? So there's been over the recent years many issues have made like ethical divides within population much more salient, right? Migration crisis is only one of them, and like many other issues can come to mind. There's issues once we go beyond the foreign policy circles, once we go beyond the echo chambers that we have, we finally meet dozens of millions of voters who have endorsed people and head of states who are not considering the global community as something to belong to, but mostly is a global community that is something to exploit. That has made us realize over the past few years that the ethical considerations that we have, like many people have very different views of what is ethical and what is not. And of course, this has made governments much more unstable in the sense that it's very difficult to maintain a multilateral forum when every term you will have a more polarized government in place, a more polarized administration in place. So there's this brings like the international rule of law becomes much more brittle because of this lack of multilateral stability. We have seen that. So the second point is that this situation would lead to further polarization, especially in the domain of AI actually. So let me explain this a bit more carefully. So there is right now, because of this lack of multilateral approach, there is very weak governance of AI at the global level. We do not have the principles that we want. We do not have an international privacy treaty. We do not have an international non-discrimination treaty. So that is problematic. There is even beyond that a greater issue that wasn't the case. As you know, like the AI-empowered industries relies on economies of scales, which means that they exhibit monopolistic tendencies. Once you have relatively more power than your competitor, you are much more likely the year after to be even more powerful than your competitor. So that leads to a global oligopoly, which we have seen with the big internet giants or AI giants. And this translates for the nations that have spawned these technological champions and technological giants. For these nations, that translates into greater soft power and greater bargaining power in their international relations. So far, so good, but the fact that there is a lack of multilateral dialogue actually leads to a lot of unilateral and bilateral initiatives being taken among nations, often with very asymmetrical bargaining power, leading to developing countries, for example, becoming cyber-colonized. Cyber-colonization is like, basically the symptom of it is the fact that some developing countries' entire digital economy and infrastructure is owned effectively, if not contractually, by foreign stakeholders. These foreign stakeholders, even if they do not have ulterior strategic motives, often have like their own interest at stake, right? So even like coincidentally would lead to greater inequality, lower competitiveness in the developing countries that of the market of which they enter. So if we do not have this multilateral dialogue, these countries that did not manage to spawn a strong AI industry finish by being exploited in a certain way by the countries that did manage. And this is, of course, entrenching a global hierarchy that we might not consider too optimal, at least for if we are caring about fairness and human rights. So the solutions which I foresee is really to shift gear, and instead of relying on this traditional multilateral approach, to go on with more original and more modern form of collaborating, which is the multi-stakeholder approach. When governments and decision makers at heads of state do not talk to each other anymore, or cannot talk to each other because their constituency do not want to talk to each other, like it's the duty of public sector, other public sector representative, private sector, civil society, and academia to come together to ensure that at least on other levels, nations, like communities, are still talking to each other, like globally. So it is very important that we manage this to create these forums for these people. And actually, as we mentioned, 2019 might be a tipping point because we have several initiatives starting. So for example, one of the success, let's say, of the multi-stakeholder approach is the creation in the spring meetings of the AI for SDG Center, which will be a hub for entrepreneurs, investors, but also academics and development professionals to come together to leverage AI for the fulfillment of the Sustainable Development Goals. In 2019, so in 2 weeks as well, we will have the Global Governance of AI Roundtable, which brings to over 200 people, experts in AI policy from the private sector, public sector, and civil society, and academia, of course, together to discuss like a global framework, which even though will not have the biting power of an international treaty, will have the legitimacy, let's say, of 200 of the global community of citizens rather than nation states. So yes, I think it is this approach, multi-stakeholder approach, holds great promises. We'll see in a couple of years whether this also enables further discussions later on, bringing back to the multilateral level, like providing a basis for that. But it is, at least for now, what I foresee is the most productive.
Mm-hmm. And I thank you for that. We all have stakes here also as individuals, and I'm sure that also you, like me, or our speakers have our kind of concerns. May I now turn to you, and what for you as individuals are the biggest ethical questions in artificial intelligence? Please, and if I may ask, thank you very much. Just press it and it should be green, is it? So if not, select. Okay.
You just try.
No, just start speaking. Apologies.
So, Michael Swan, I'm sorry I wasn't planning to take the floor again, but I feel like I have to. The question you asked what our questions would be, and my question would be how we work towards a multilateral approach. I worked for 4 years on human rights policy in a previous incarnation. I want to push back very vigorously on the suggestion that the multilateral approach is dead. It's not dead, it's not true. It is under pressure, it is under attack from some quarters, but I think that this is partly down to a news cycle driven by social media where people have very short memories. And yes, there's a lot of froth about attacks on the multilateral system, but every day it is functioning in every sector. And we need it because the point that Mr. Kodak made about, for IBM, an ethical policy being good for business, I believe, for some companies, but as in all the work that's been done on business and human rights in the UN setting, one closed shop may make an excellent business by showing how fair trade and ethical they are. Another one is selling, T-shirts for €1 produced in sweatshops. The marketplace is very big, and for every IBM, there will be another unnamed IT sweatshop who will do the dirty work for a knockdown price. So, multi-stakeholder approach, excellent, as a way to build towards a multilateral understanding about how to tackle AI, because inherently, it comes down the wire. It's a worldwide thing. So, national, regional approaches are just going to hit inherent limits.
Thank you. Let's take it straight away. I think both of you, Nicholas, should react, but I would like to invite Brian and
Sure. So yeah, I don't think we are too much in disagreement over there. Like the multilateral approach right now, it's not dead. Obviously, it is temporarily failing, as you mentioned. Maybe it's a cycle linked to that. The multi-stakeholder approach works when there is, and I want to make that clear, of course, when there is civil society and any other representative of the communities that are not for profit in there. And of course, a lot of companies in multi-stakeholder forums that we have organized or that have been organized, a lot of companies want to step away from that because they fear that it would hurt their profits. So for now, that's why we don't have this biting power, let's say, to force companies to abide to this, to the pleasure and the preferences of the citizens. But it does provide a temporary fix, and hopefully, as you mentioned, over time, this will be provide the basis for a renewed multilateral order.
I think, I mean, I'm not naive, and I don't expect everybody around the world to, every company around the world to suddenly start adopting ethical guidelines on AI. I mean, what we're doing is that we're sharing our view. We operate around the world. We're sharing our views with everybody. We've made our principles, and we are inviting everybody to join us on this journey. I think the world is changing. It is clearly taking more time for some companies than for others. But I think at the end of the day, companies will face enforcement, whether it is legal enforcement on the one hand or a reaction from their consumers, again, be it in the B2B or B2C on the other hand, because there is a backlash and there is a real lack of trust that exists. It is something that is very clear in the discussions that we have with governments around the world and with all of our clients. The whole discussion about, for instance, data ownership. 5 years ago, it was a non-discussion. Why? Because companies that had all of this data just did not realize the value that data had, and so they were just giving it away. And you had then a number of platforms that were being created and just taking all of this data. But we've seen a huge shift. Whereas, in every sector, all of these companies, non-tech companies, have realized that, oh, well, actually, I'm sitting on all of these resources here. Why should I hand them out, to others? Why don't I start using them? And so, and the same is happening on AI, because the AI is a technical revolution in the sense that it's going to impact every aspect of society, and it's going to impact every job. I mean, this is our firm belief that 100% of jobs will somehow be transformed by AI. So AI is going to be pervasive. It's just going to be everywhere. And because of that, and because companies and regions are realizing that without AI you are not competitive, people are now already thinking about the type of AI I want to develop. Now, we should not expect that somehow, we should not demand that AI ethics be implemented in every AI application. There are clearly certain applications where it's maybe not necessary, because they're very simple, or because they are not in sensitive sectors. So we definitely need to look at the wide variety of AI applications. And the way I look at it is that the weight that is given to each principle will be different in each application. But somehow we need to make that analysis and start identifying those applications, what are the different weight of the ethical values, the principles that we want to give in certain applications. We should not do, what we did on data privacy in Europe is that we created a horizontal rule that applies to everything, and then afterwards we started thinking about, okay, how does it apply to me now? So we did the things backward. But we have this gold standard, which is clearly something positive. I think on AI, through this multi-stakeholder approach, we can do something different. Is we look at the values and then we start looking at the applications and look at it from a vertical perspective and see how we apply those. Sorry.
Thank you. Brian, would you like to react on this question?
Sure. A couple of things. I guess Michael Swan's point about the multilateral system and yours, Nicholas, about the multi-stakeholder approach. I'm not an expert in either of those two types of things, but I do spend some time thinking about them, both in work and from an academic perspective. So I do know that multi-stakeholder approaches are great at bringing more people together to help understand the problem and to implement solutions. They're not always the best for coming together and taking a decision because it's difficult. We see that in multilateral approaches, and I think it would be even more complex in multi-stakeholder approaches. Nonetheless, the more engagement and involvement we have in understanding and responding, there are things in all of our different communities that we will need to do together to implement, whether we're business, and I think we can all plan to, the kind of notion of planning for the best and preparing for the worst is true here too. We can all plan to provide the best guidance and leadership to the international community for the things that we need to do to respond and get the best out of AI, and at the same time be prepared that there will be some malign actors that will do things or unintended things that we might see, artificial intelligence having unintended consequences because algorithms were developed in ways that we didn't predict to achieve one end might have a negative human impact on the other end. So we need to prepare for those. One other thing, since I've been talking about some things that took place in the G7 context last year, there was a rapid response mechanism that was, in terms of preparing for possible negative events. Rapid response mechanism was developed for G7 countries, and then eventually I think that will broaden as well, but to look at challenges to democracies that come from different environments, including the digital environment and direct kind of attacks that we see in an online environment, involving AI included. So there's some things, I think we have to respond to some challenges that are out there, and that's part of the multilateral system, but at the same time we also have to respond to guiding the system and taking the steps that we can to achieve the best possible things for each of us as individuals and for the common society.
Well, 1 minute. I agree with your vision. Just to remind you that 2 or 3 years ago, when we started to discuss the future GDPR, we've heard more or less the same kind of examples. There is always a company ready to do the dirty job. It means that's what the reason to not move forward and get the GDPR that we do have nowadays, and exactly is a benchmark, and is a benchmark for other regions, for other countries, and it made, as I believe that AI ethics would also or will also make I would say a broader uptake of AI globally speaking, and this is a very strong message coming from the European Union, and I think that I understand your point, but to be very honest, I think that that's one reason for which we should not avoid to get a strong ethical approach, because by the end of the day, people will for sure, individuals or states, choose the most ethical offer. That's at least my perception as a policymaker right now.
Thank you very much, Ricardo. This discussion certainly can go on. I will invite you to continue informally with our speakers from this and previous panels over lunch. I don't know, I am hungry, so I would like to wrap soon. But before that, let me make a few announcements. First of all, once again, such a warm thank you to our partners from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Finland for actually enabling us to work on such an exciting research. And I would just like to invite you. Thank you, and we hope to cooperate further with you. I would also like to thank the Center for Data Innovation, which is our partner, new partner here in Brussels, and notably Eline Chivot. Without her help, we would have never been able to put this event together. Thank you very much, Eline. I would obviously like to thank the whole Diplo team that was behind this. Only fraction is present here because there is quite some machinery behind, but obviously I need to mention the name of Katarina Hene, the lead author of the report, over there. Nicole Reynolds, also our contact here in Brussels, so I encourage you to talk to her also in the break. Thank you, Nicole. And our great helpers, Pauline, who has been patiently sitting at the front desk, and Anna Maria, one of, by the way, the curators for our Digital Watch Observatory, where we tackle AI and other digital policy issues. Thank you also. I presume you would like to get the report, so please, I mean, one way is to, we will, Eline, correct me if I'm wrong, we can follow up with all of you that have registered for this email to make sure you get this report in your mailbox. It is also available for free download at diplomacy.edu/AI website, so please do that. And I would also like to encourage you to subscribe to mailing lists of both the Center for Data Innovation and Diplo Foundation. We hope to stay in touch. Thank you so much for staying, and have a good afternoon.